Good Wednesday afternoon. Thanks for joining us on KARE 11 News Now. I'm Chris Harapsky. There are new developments this afternoon in the Luigi Mangione case. He's the man charged with killing United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson back in December of 2024. We've learned the defense team plans to use a psychiatric defense at Mangione's state murder trial in New York this fall. Attorneys are expected to argue that Mangione experienced an extreme emotional disturbance when he shot Thompson. A New York judge ordered Mangione's defense to turn over evidence to support their argument, along with expert names to prosecutors by Thursday. Mangione has pleaded not guilty to murder and weapons charges in the state case. He's also facing federal charges in that shooting. We're starting to learn more about the 15 people now facing federal charges accused of conspiracy to injure a federal officer during Operation Metro Surge. Audrey Russo was at the federal courthouse where some of the defendants appeared before a judge for the first time.
Good morning. As those defendants were appearing before the judge, things got fairly tense outside here at the St. Paul Federal Courthouse. Now, there was a clash between law enforcement and some demonstrators, and at one point, a chemical irritant was actually used on some folks that were trying to keep the doors of the courthouse propped open. Take a look at this video. You can see the fray as it was unfolding yesterday afternoon. A lot of pushing and a lot of shoving there. Now inside, the courtroom was packed with family, friends, and supporters of the 15 defendants. Some of their charges include stalking and assault. Now, the 94-page indictment accuses one defendant of following an agent from the Whipple building to their home during Operation Metro Surge, and others of throwing blocks of ice at agents. Now, the indictment doesn't list any injuries, and U.S. Attorney Dan Rosen didn't answer when asked if any federal agents were hurt. As for the fray outside the courthouse, here's how one of the defense attorneys described it.
I've never seen people violently attacked for peacefully protesting outside the federal courthouse.
Now, as for what comes next in this case, federal prosecutors tried to have the defendants held in detention, but the judge ultimately ordered that that wasn't necessary. The judge did, however, order that the defendants have no contact with each other, and they're now barred from doing any sort of protest activity on federal properties. Back to you.
Thank you, Audrey. One of the key words that federal prosecutors used when announcing these charges was Antifa, alleging some of those defendants have ties to Antifa groups. Sammy Salina digs deeper into what exactly that means.
Painting a picture of an Antifa conspiracy, federal prosecutors accused 15 people of violently impeding immigration enforcement in the Twin Cities this year.
This action is not peaceful. It's obstructive, disruptive, and unlawful.
Daniel Rosen, U.S. District Attorney, claimed defendants were members of Minneapolis groups connected with Antifa. The indictment shows pages of signal messages, with some suggesting protesters should use more force. There were examples of people following ICE, creating blockades, and damaging agents' vehicles.
Not talking about peaceful protests anymore. We're not talking about having polite conversations anymore.
Rosen showed this video of Kyle Wagner in a bulletproof vest, saying Preddy may not have died if people brought guns to the federal Whipple building. He is among the indicted and was arrested back in February.
What kind of injuries did officers sustain as part of these campaigns, if any? Can you elaborate on that?
I can't elaborate on that today, and I don't believe I used the word attacks, but if I did, I stand by it.
When Rosen was asked about the definition of Antifa, he didn't give one.
So what is Antifa goes beyond, I think, the scope of what this indictment is.
So could you explain what Antifa is?
Sure. Antifa is short for anti-fascism in a number of languages, and it's a politics or a strategy of resistance to the far right from below. It's not itself an organization. There's no leader, there's no headquarters. It's a transnational movement that's existed for decades.
Mark Bray is a historian and author on Antifa.
Trump wants us to think that protest is terrorism. Trump wants us to think that the Democratic Party and the left are violent extremists hell-bent on destroying everything.
He believes the federal administration is making an example of those charged.
This federal government, which is accusing people of intent to violence, is the government that let the January 6th insurrectionaries off the hook.
He says even if there are convictions, he doesn't believe it will dull the fire.
I think it's pretty clear that when you look at the model of resistance that was carried out in the streets of Minneapolis, of this kind of broad-based popular opposition to ICE from everyday people from all walks of life, bringing themselves out to oppose ICE on the streets.
Sammy Solina.
So that's really the takeaway from this era of resistance and ICE.
KARE 11 News.
There's a hearing today for the man accused of stabbing Derek Chauvin. The former Minneapolis police officer is serving time for the 2020 murder of George Floyd. Prosecutors say John Tershak stabbed Chauvin 22 times with a makeshift knife while inside an Arizona prison. He told FBI agents he wanted to hurt Chauvin because he's a high-profile inmate. Tershak has pleaded not guilty. The Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board is expected to decide today whether to close a popular off-leash dog park. Board members say Minnehaha Dog Park is on sacred land for the Dakota people. Megan McPherson has more on today's vote.
Yes, so the board says that studies and interviews with Indigenous historians found the area is sacred to the Dakota people, serving as an important site for water and ceremonial practices. With that understanding, they believe continuing to operate an off-leash dog park there no longer felt appropriate. Earlier this month, the board's planning committee approved this resolution, heading to the full board for a vote tonight. If approved, the park would remain open, but dogs would no longer be allowed off-leash. A group of frequent park users has launched an online petition urging commissioners to delay the vote. This petition calls on the board to be more transparent and gather input from dog owners who say they have not been included in the process. One dog owner telling us last week there may be other ways to protect the site while keeping the off-leash area open. The resolution also directs the park superintendent to identify a replacement off-leash site with similar features, including water access, with the goal of closing the dog park by the end of this year. Tonight's meeting begins at 5. Back to you.
A new poll revealing sinking approval for outgoing Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. KARE 11 partnered with the Minnesota Star-Tribune and the U of M's Hubbard School of Journalism to survey people across the state. Audrey Russo shares those results.
Governor Tim Walz has a lower approval rating than President Donald Trump among Minnesota voters. According to a KARE 11 Star-Tribune Hubbard School of Journalism poll, just 39% of respondents endorsed Walz's second term.
The election's going to come down to the swing vote.
Political scientist Larry Jacobs says there's one issue in particular where Walz's job performance has left a scar on his own party.
On the issue of fraud, the independents are siding with Republicans. They trust them more.
Trust them more to fix fraud by 45%, compared to the 38% who trust Democrats to get the job done.
I feel the Democrats aren't doing much about it. They kind of slap someone's hands and whatever, but they're not making a big deal out of it.
Yeah, we should have caught that. We should have systems in place. That's a problem.
Is fraud a kitchen table issue?
Fraud is not a kitchen table issue. Fraud is certainly an aggravation, but it may not have the bite, the prominence, the salience to actually move voters come November.
Other big issues on the voters' minds: gun control. A debate reignited by the Annunciation shooting.
All children have the right to live, free from gun violence.
53% of respondents support an assault weapons ban. When you look at the geography, you'll see overwhelming enthusiasm in the urban core and a tighter split everywhere else. Voters are more united on artificial intelligence. 63% of voters oppose AI data centers. And we can't forget about the new state flag. Of the Minnesotans we polled, 50% don't like the redesign, 30% do, and 20% are on the fence.
This same Minnesota poll also found President Trump's job approval remains underwater, with most in Minnesota. 56% said they disapprove of the job the president is doing in office. That matches the previous worst disapproval for the president in the Minnesota poll back in his first term. 41% say they approve of the job that he's doing as president. Right now, President Trump is wrapping up his meetings with world leaders at the G7 summit in France, where one of the big topics of conversation has been the U.S. war with Iran. NBC's Alice Barr is covering that summit.
Hi there. As the summit wraps up here in France, G7 allies, including the U.S., have now signed on to a joint statement pledging tougher sanctions against Russia over the war in Ukraine and praising President Trump's framework for peace with Iran. The president acknowledged today that the memorandum of understanding is not final.
It's a memorandum of understanding. If it doesn't get done in 60 days, that's all right. We go back to bombing. You know, I don't want to do that because it's so good. But we might have to.
On Capitol Hill, even top Republicans say they're yet to be briefed on the deal that President Trump said keeps Iran from ever having a nuclear weapon, does not include U.S. investments in Iran, and guarantees an open, toll-free Strait of Hormuz. Already, one tracking site shows average U.S. gas prices dropping below $4 a gallon, though industry experts say shipping won't get back to normal for weeks. And serious questions still have to be worked out in a second phase of negotiations on the details of Iran's nuclear program, plus questions about the status of fighting between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon. Still, President Trump is insisting Iran is a done deal, signaling a shift to focusing on Ukraine after meeting with Ukrainian President Zelensky on the summit's sidelines and signing on for more support. And President Trump heads next to Versailles for a very special dinner with the President of France. In Evian-les-Bains, France, Alice Barr, NBC News.
Stick with us. We got more news and weather. It's coming up after the break.